Hello, and welcome to Episode 6 of Sarastro's Star Wars Legion painting series. In this episode, we're going to paint Darth Vader from Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars Legion. Darth Vader is an intimidating character and presents us with some fun challenges when painting. If you're nervous about painting him, there'd be nothing wrong with simply priming him in black, applying a few basic highlights in grey, and perhaps some gloss varnish to the armour. This would already make your Vader look 10 times better than when unpainted, and you can always return to the figure at any time in the future to add some more advanced highlights and object source lighting if you wish. Let's take a look at the painting stages. After assembling the miniature, I'm providing a prime in plain black. I'll then use some blue-tinged shades of grey to paint the outfit, making heavy use of contrast to render the different materials, from the soft fabric of the cloak to the hard, shiny armour. Next we'll paint the lightsaber, and I'll be creating a gradient to add some interest. We'll then use a simple red glaze to add some object source lighting like we did for Luke in Episode 1, and I'll be providing a scenic base along with some gentle weathering. Let's begin. The figure comes in 3 parts and is pretty simple to assemble. I'm now using some brush-on matte varnish to fill the small gap around the edge of the cloak. We can then go ahead and prime the figure in black, either with a spray can or an airbrush. Once done, we're ready to begin painting. I'm going to begin by mixing a bluish-black base tone by mixing some dark sea blue into some black in a roughly 3:1 ratio. Because I'm going to paint Vader in a single long session, I'm also mixing in a little glaze medium just to extend the drying time. Alternatively, you could of course use a wet palette. I'm now using this to base coat the entire outfit. With Luke Skywalker, we used mostly warm shades of grey for the outfit, which contrasted nicely against the cold blue of the lightsaber. For Vader, I'm doing the reverse by using colder bluish greys for the outfit to contrast against the warmer tones of the red lightsaber. The blue we've added into this base tone will become more apparent when we lighten it for the highlights. I'm now going to begin highlighting the cloak by mixing in some blue-grey pale. Most shades of pale grey, or white even, would be fine for this. I'm going to first transfer a good amount of the base tone into a neighbouring well, so that I can preserve some to use later on. I'm now mixing in some of the blue-grey pale and using a reasonably thin consistency to begin creating my highlights. Working just on the areas of soft fabric for the moment, we can apply this to all but the most recessed areas. I'm now moving on to the striated leather suit, picking out all of the raised areas of padding. An easier alternative to handling the leather could be to paint the whole area with a mid-tone grey and simply apply a black shade to darken the recesses. I've chosen to paint the area manually to give me full control of the placement of contrast as I build up the highlights. I'm now lightening the tone further with some additional blue-grey pale in a few stages. I'm going to be providing some gentle weathering to the foot of the cloak later on, so I'm not too concerned with things looking perfect at this stage. To help smooth some of these transitions on the cloak, I might quickly rinse the brush and give it a quick wipe, before brushing it over the border to feather the edge. Glazing over the transitions with the original off-black base tone is another way you might like to smooth things over. Here I'm quite quickly pulling the brush off to create a tapered finish to each stroke. This is as bright as I want to take the cloak because the material is quite soft and unreflective. But I'm going to continue pushing the contrast on the leather because it has a shinier texture. I'm now jumping to a fairly bright tone for the hanging fabric near the lightsaber to begin laying the groundwork for the object source lighting we'll be adding later on. This may look a little over bright now, but will look fine in the end. I'm also creating some smaller, brighter highlights for the leather to create the impression of a more glossy finish. To steer the highlights away from looking too blue, I'm now lightening the tone with some white instead of the blue-grey pale. And I'm pushing the contrast even further for the shiny leather, especially for those parts that are closest to the lightsaber. I'm now moving on to the armour, which is the shiniest part of the outfit. I'm going to take quite a bold approach here by first laying down some small highlights using pure white. We can then use a couple of increasingly darker shades of grey to create a short transition leading up to the white. So first I'm applying a fairly pale grey, followed with a darker grey. Transitions can be smoothed either by wet blending the tones or feathering out the edges. Here I'm reinforcing the pure white highlight. We can also highlight the boots along the way. We don't need necessarily smooth transitions to create the effect we're after. The main thing is that we achieve a shift from pure white to the dark base tone over quite a short distance, and I'm aiming to ensure that the majority of the armour is still the original off-black. For the chest piece, I'm now using a mid-tone grey to paint the central panel and each alternating panel either side. These can then be highlighted with a pale grey or even white. And once again, now using a slightly darker grey to create a more blended look. I'm now highlighting the darker panels. We can also now pick out the edge of the chest panel with a pale grey. As usual, I'm making corrections as I work. I'm also making the right shoulder quite bright due to its proximity to the lightsaber. Finally, I'm going to paint the helmet, and I'm going to begin by sketching in some quite bold highlights in pure white. The best advice I can offer here is to paint bravely, and don't be afraid to try a range of ideas out. Looking at reference shots from the movies should offer plenty of ways to arrange your highlights. One of the main things I've tried to achieve is to ensure that there's some visible interest regardless of the angle from which the figure is viewed. Here I'm using the original base tone to adjust the size and shape of some of the highlights, or indeed remove entirely any that I'm not happy with. We can then once again use a few different shades of grey to create some short transitions leading into the pure white highlights. It's fine if things look a little sketchy at first. I'm not following any strict method here, I'm just playing around with the tones, sometimes going back and forth with the shades of grey and white until I have a look I'm happy with. Some of the highlights can be left with quite a sharp edge, whilst others might blend away more smoothly. Some areas of reflection can also be any shade of grey rather than white. I'm paying particular attention to the highlights on the mask. It's useful to regularly view the figure from a more normal gaming distance to better judge the overall effect. With the helmet complete, I'm now going to paint the front of the belt with quite a pale grey. We can then provide some shading around the circular design by thinning down some of the off-black base tone. And here I'm tidying up with the pale grey. I'm also using this pale grey for the rows of buttons on the sides of the belt. And I'm now highlighting the edge of the central belt piece with some pure white. For the chain on the cloak, which is quite a dark metal, I'm mixing a darker shade of grey and dabbing on a few highlights. And here I'm adding a few lighter grey highlights. Next I'm painting the pale grey buttons and lights on the chest. And I'm using Mephiston Red for some of the others. Bear in mind that the precise arrangement of colours here does vary from film to film. Finally, for the chest area, I'm using some Kantor Blue mixed with a little white for the last remaining detail on the chest. I'm finishing the belt off by painting the 2 pairs of lights on either side with Sybarite Green. With the outfit complete, we're ready to paint the lightsaber. I'm going to begin by providing a few grey highlights to the handle of the lightsaber. For the blade itself, I'm going to first provide an undercoat of pure white. This is just to ensure that the red we'll be adding in a moment turns out nice and bright. I'm now painting over this with Mephiston Red. I'm now going to create a gradient to add interest, and I'm going to mix in some orange fluo to lighten the tone, although any bright orange would be fine. I'm focusing just on the upper front-facing part of the blade, and I'm pushing the pigments up towards the handle of the lightsaber to create my gradient. This can be done in a couple of layers. I'm now using more or less pure orange. We can now begin adding white to lighten the tone further, focusing the highlight closer to the handle. I'm using a damp brush here to feather the paint out. If necessary, we can reapply some of the pure red from the other end to smooth things over. Here's my lightest tone. With that done, we're ready to add some finishing touches. We can now apply the colour component of our object source lighting. To do that, I'm creating a thin glaze by mixing 1 part of Bloodletter with 4 parts of Larmian medium. Using a thin consistency like this makes it much easier to build the effect up in a more gradual and controlled way. Just as we did with Luke, we should apply this to all of the areas we would imagine would be hit with light from the lightsaber, and we should try to avoid letting the glaze pool. The effect of this first layer will be quite subtle, but it will dry pretty quickly, and we can begin applying additional layers to strengthen the effect to our liking. I'm now increasing the concentration with a couple more drops of the red glaze, and I'm focusing more heavily on the areas closest to the lightsaber. This is a nice easy way to create object source lighting, but it will dull the highlights slightly. So I'm using the bright lightsaber tone to re-highlight a few of the raised details on Vader's right arm, shoulder and chest. With the figure complete, I'm now going to apply my basing paste in the usual way. Once dry, I'm shading the base with my standard mix of Biel-Tan Green and Athonian Camoshade, but I'm leaving the front section clear for me to add some of the red glaze. I'm then going to add some additional colour and texture with my usual range of turf and grit. And here too, I'm applying the red glaze to the area that's closest to the lightsaber. To pull the illusion off, however, I'm going to darken the green shade with the addition of some Drakenhof Nightshade and Agrax Earthshade. I'm then applying this to the remaining areas of ground to darken the tone. This not only better suits the mood of the figure, but it also makes the red area appear lighter by comparison, thus more effectively selling the illusion of object source lighting. I'm now going to provide some gentle weathering to the base of Vader's cloak with some thinned Stormvermin Fur. This can be built up in a few layers to your liking. I'm now painting the rim of the base in black, and apart from applying a protective matte spray, I'm going to finish the miniature off by glazing a little of the original off black into the recesses of the cloak that have become over bright due to the weathering. And this completes Darth Vader. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed the video. With Vader complete, we have now covered all of the figures from the base set, which means we'll soon be turning our attention to some of the expansions. So join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Star Wars Legion. Happy painting!